The leather in the Gulfstream G650 smelled like new money and old secrets. Not the cheap, oily smell of a rental car upgrade, but something deep, cured, and maybe slightly dangerous. It was 6 a.m. The sun hadn't even finished deciding if it was going to burn off the Georgia humidity, and I was sitting 40,000 feet above the earth, watching Atlanta disappear like a bad memory. 24 hours. That was the deal. The whole point of this insanity. Live it, breathe it, experience the frictionless reality of being a black man who doesn't just have money, the kind of money that lets you buy up blocks in Buckhead or finance entire film studios, but the status that comes with it. Billionaire status. It's a different atmosphere. You think you know rich people because you've seen the music videos or read the Forbes list? You don't. That's the entry level. This right here, this silence, this speed, this feeling that the entire world is waiting for your next instruction, that's the air they breathe. My name is Kai, or rather, for the next day, my name was whatever the security detail and the personal staff whispered into their comms. Let's stick with Kai. I was a writer, a guy who usually spends his mornings arguing with TSA about a carry-on that's clearly the right size. Now, I was arguing with a guy named Darnell about the thread count of the cashmere blanket they'd offered me. Darnell looked like he could bench press a small car, but he moved like a ballet dancer, silent and everywhere at once. He was the head of security, hired muscle wrapped in a bespoke Italian suit. Sir, Mr. Sterling insists on the 800 thread, not the standard 600, Darnell said, his voice a low, perfect rumble that sounded like it had been professionally optimized for discreet communication. Mr. Sterling, that was the ghost I was shadowing, the man whose life I was borrowing. Sterling the Hammer Hayes, real estate mogul, tech investor, owner of half the skyline in 3 major cities, and one of the quietest, most powerful black men in American finance. He wasn't on the plane, obviously. He was already wherever the real billionaires are, probably doing a 3-hour workout before the rest of the world woke up, buying a small island on his iPad. But his infrastructure was mine, his time, his staff, his rules. I took the 800 thread blanket. It felt like I was wrapping myself in liquefied clouds. This wasn't just about the objects. It was about the expectation of the best, the right to the best. We landed in Miami Executive Airport, OPF, the private side, of course. No waiting for baggage, no shuffling through the main terminal with the cattle. We taxied right up to a hangar that looked cleaner than my old apartment. The air hit me, hot, thick, smelling of salt and diesel. The transition from the jet to the ground transportation was less than 40 seconds. It wasn't a sprint. It was a choreography. Darnell and 3 other giants formed an immediate perimeter. They moved with a chilling efficiency, scanning the horizon, the rooftops, the ground crew. It was less about protecting me from a physical threat and more about insulating me from the annoyance of being seen or slowed down. The car waiting was a black armored Mercedes Maybach S680. It looked less like a car and more like a mobile fortress built by German engineers with a limitless budget. The doors didn't click shut. They sealed with a heavy, satisfying thump that cut off the Miami morning noise instantly. Inside, the light was soft, adjustable. There were 2 screens running silent stock tickers. A small refrigerated compartment held water that cost more than my weekly groceries. I hadn't even had coffee yet. And the sheer logistics involved in moving me 600 miles had already cost more than my annual rent. First stop, Darnell stated, strapped into the front passenger seat, looking straight ahead. The Brickell penthouse. Quick change and review of the 9:20 a.m. acquisition brief. The legal team is waiting. Acquisition brief. I had never acquired anything in my life except maybe a bad habit or a parking ticket. My stomach twisted. This was where the performance anxiety kicked in. This wasn't just wearing expensive clothes. This was inhabiting a mind that operates on a scale I couldn't conceptualize. I was supposed to be Sterling Hayes. I was supposed to understand why he needed a 70-story building in downtown Miami and how the zoning laws affected his EBITDA. I had spent the last 2 weeks cramming, reading biographies of black financial titans, Robert Smith, Oprah, Hayes himself, studying terms like leverage, debt-to-equity ratios, and hostile takeovers. It felt like trying to memorize the entire Library of Congress in 48 hours. I pulled out the binder they had given me, black leather, heavy paper, embossed with the Sterling Global logo, a stylized, aggressive hawk. The brief detailed the potential purchase of a chain of boutique hotels in the Caribbean, a $300 million deal, the kind of money where you barely feel the withdrawal. Darnell, I asked, flipping pages, what's the primary risk factor on the St. Kitts properties? Is the political instability priced in, or are we relying on the local government guarantees? I watched him in the rearview mirror. He raised one eyebrow. It was the slightest movement, but it spoke volumes. You sound like you read that in the binder, Kai. Mr. Hayes, Darnell corrected gently, reminding me of the role. The risk factor is managed through the escrow structure. The guarantees are solid based on the Prime Minister's personal assurance to Mr. Hayes 3 months ago in Monte Carlo. The volatility is baked into the discount rate already. Your concern, sir, should be the long-term sustainability of the tourism market post-hurricane season, not the short-term political assurances. I leaned back. Damn. He knew the financials better than I did. Everyone in this ecosystem had to be world-class. The driver, the security, the chef, the guy who cleans the Gulfstream engine. They were all operating at a level I considered peak professional performance just to facilitate one man's life. The car stopped. We were at the base of the tallest residential tower in Brickell, a glass monster reflecting the morning sun. The lobby was minimalist, intimidating. No velvet ropes or potted plants, just polished concrete, silent attendants, and abstract art that probably cost more than the GDP of a small nation. We didn't wait for an elevator. We had a private express lift, sealed off, requiring a retina scan and a personalized key card the size of a credit card. Up we went, silent and fast, shooting past floors full of ordinary millionaires. We stopped on the 70th floor. The doors opened. The first thing that hit me wasn't the view. Though the entire Atlantic Ocean seemed to be spread out on a velvet cloth below the floor-to-ceiling windows, it was the quiet. Absolute, perfect, soundproof quiet. The penthouse was vast, minimalist. Every piece of furniture looked like sculpture. A single vase held 3 perfect orchids. No clutter, no mail, no evidence that a human being actually lived there, just that a financial sovereign occasionally rested there. The wardrobe is through that door, Darnell said, pointing to a seamless wall panel. The legal team is setting up in the conference room. They expect you in 20 minutes. Coffee is waiting, specific blend, 185 degrees, no sugar. I walked into the master suite. It was the size of my old 3-bedroom apartment. The closet was insane. A wall of bespoke suits, Brioni, Tom Ford, tailored specifically to Hayes's exact measurements, which, thankfully, were close enough to mine that the clothes hung perfectly. I changed out of the jet clothes and into a charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and shoes that felt like I was walking on air. The watch, a Patek Philippe Grand Complication, felt heavy and cold on my wrist, a $250,000 anchor to reality. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see Kai, the stressed writer. I saw a man who expected things, a man who demanded space and silence, a man who looked like he could close a $300 million deal before lunch. The clothes were armor. The watch was a shield. The confidence. That was the hardest part to fake. I walked into the conference room. It wasn't a room, it was a command center. A massive mahogany table, polished so bright I could see my reflection, sat 6 people who looked like they hadn't slept in a week and were running purely on espresso and the fear of failure. They were diverse, razor sharp, and all of them stood immediately when I entered. Mr. Hayes, the lead counsel, a woman named Vanessa, who looked like she could argue the sun into setting early, stated, placing a thick folder precisely in front of my chair, "We need to finalize the non-compete clause language before the 9:30 call with Kingston." I sat down. The chair was perfectly ergonomic, perfectly silent. I took a sip of the 185-degree coffee. It burned, but it tasted like victory. The next hour was a blur of acronyms, aggressive terminology, and spreadsheets that made my head spin. They weren't asking me to understand the mechanics, they were asking for direction. They needed the vision. They needed the Hayes decision. "Vanessa," I said, leaning forward, trying to channel the quiet power I imagined Sterling Hayes possessed. I remembered a note I had read in the briefing about Hayes's ruthless focus on long-term assets over quick cash. The original proposal values the St. Croix property based solely on current occupancy rates. I want the valuation adjusted to reflect the potential for integration with the private yacht charter market we discussed last quarter. I don't care about the occupancy right now. I care about the synergy with the leisure division in Q3 2024. Can we push the non-compete to limit acquisition of any competing regional charter business for 5 years, not 3? The room went silent. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in immediate recalculation. "Sir, that significantly complicates the leverage structure and might push the sellers back," she cautioned, flipping pages rapidly. "Let them push back," I countered, the words feeling surprisingly easy on my tongue. The sheer size of the numbers gave me a strange kind of liberation. When you're dealing with hundreds of millions, the small stuff vanishes. If they aren't willing to protect the future value of the asset, they don't deserve the premium we are offering. Adjust the paperwork. Get the leverage team on the line. I want the revised term sheet ready before the 9:30 call. I finished the coffee, stood up abruptly, a classic power move apparently, and walked toward the window, looking out over the bay. "Is the helicopter ready?" I asked Darnell without turning around. "On the pad, Mr. Hayes. Ready for the jump to Tampa." Tampa. The next phase. The public face of the operation. This was the rhythm. Never settling. Always moving the pieces. The wealth wasn't just money. It was constant, relentless momentum. And the blackness of the wealth? That added a whole other layer of gravity. You could feel the weight of expectation in that room. Not just the expectation of profit, but the expectation of perfection. Sterling Hayes wasn't just a businessman. He was a symbol. Every move he made was scrutinized by communities who needed to see him win, and by competitors who desperately wanted to see him fail. There was no room for error. When you're black and playing in the white boys' sandbox at this level, your mistakes aren't just business failures. They are data points used to justify the exclusion of everyone who looks like you. I walked back into the bedroom to grab my phone, which was actually a burner phone provided by the security team. Encrypted, secure, and silent, unless I decided to make noise. The real difference between me and the billions I was pretending to command wasn't the suit or the watch. It was the absolute, total insulation from the noise of the outside world. No spam calls, no endless emails, no worries about the gas price. Everything that bothers normal people was filtered out by layers of expensive, highly motivated human beings. I was ready for the helicopter ride. I felt the adrenaline surging. The adrenaline was surging, yeah, but it wasn't the good kind you get from a roller coaster. It was the tight, coiled spring panic of an imposter about to step onto the biggest stage of his life. Darnell didn't wait for my instruction. He just opened the secure door panel, and we stepped out onto the 70th floor terrace. The wind hit me instantly, hot and aggressive, whipping the silk tie against the charcoal suit jacket. The noise was startling after the penthouse quiet, a deafening, rhythmic whump, whump, whump of the Sikorsky S-76 waiting for us, blades already churning the air above Brickell. The helipad wasn't fancy, it was functional, just concrete, paint, and 2 men in reflective gear holding us steady against the rotor wash. We moved fast. 3 steps across the pad, Darnell a silent shadow on my left, and we ducked low into the cabin. The minute the door sealed, the noise dropped to a manageable, deep vibration. It was the same soundproofing technology as the Maybach, but amplified. We lifted off with a smooth, sickening lurch that settled almost instantly into a controlled climb. Below us, Miami shrank into a toy city. I looked down at the grid of traffic, the thousands of people stuck in the morning rush, sweating in their Hondas, arguing with their bosses about being 5 minutes late. They were operating on a scale of time and inconvenience that no longer applied to me. Sterling Hayes didn't wait. The world waited for him. Reviewing the Tampa talking points, Mr. Hayes, Darnell said, handing me a thin tablet, the light perfectly adjusted to the cabin's low ambient glow. The mayor is running 15 minutes behind schedule due to a presser on the budget shortfall. We'll use the time for a final run-through. The Tampa event was the groundbreaking for the Genesis Tech Hub, Hayes' massive investment in affordable office space and training centers in a historically underserved neighborhood. This wasn't just a financial play, this was an optics play. It was the necessary public ritual of giving back, of showing the community that the wealth, the black wealth, wasn't just hoarding resources, but reinvesting them. I skimmed the points. They were perfect, a blend of hard economic data, 3,000 new jobs over 5 years, and emotional resonance. This is about planting seeds for the next generation of innovators. The words were easy enough, but I had to deliver them with the conviction of a man who actually signed the $50 million check. I realized something up here. The money isn't the point. The money is just the fuel. The real product is control. Hayes controls time, space, and narrative. He controls who gets access and who waits. That level of control required constant, exhausting maintenance. That was the hidden cost of the 800-thread blanket and the soundproof ceiling. We flew for 40 minutes over the Gulf. I tried to relax to inhabit the suit, but the Patek Philippe on my wrist felt like it was counting down to my exposure. We didn't land at Tampa International. We landed on the roof of the tallest law firm building downtown, a massive, polished, monolith-owned surprise by Sterling Global. The transition was instant. Helicopter to private elevator, elevator to a waiting, identical Maybach motorcade in the underground garage. We never touched the street-level chaos. The drive was short, only 10 minutes, but it felt like entering a different dimension. The neighborhood was vibrant, struggling, and now completely shut down by police barricades and security details. When we stopped, the door was opened by a different security operative. This one focused on crowd management. The energy outside was electric. Not a hostile crowd, but a crowd thick with expectation. Local politicians, camera crews, neighborhood leaders, and maybe 100 curious residents. I stepped out into the blinding Florida sun. The first thing I registered was the noise again, not the helicopter's roar, but the sudden snap of cameras, the low roar of the assembled crowd, the flash of the television lights. I adjusted my eyes, forcing a slight, practiced smile, the Hayes smile which I'd studied in dozens of photos. Confident, slightly benevolent, totally impenetrable. Darnell was immediately behind me, a physical wall against the world. He spoke into his lapel mic. Clear path to the podium. Maintain pace. The mayor is next to the seal. I walked the 20 yards that separated the Maybach from the stage. Every step felt televised, scrutinized. I saw the faces, a mix of hope and cynicism. Show us the money, Hayes. I reached the small, elevated stage adorned with banners reading, Genesis Building Our Future. Mayor Jenkins, a tired-looking man in a suit too big for him, extended his hand, his eyes wide with relief. Sterling Hayes had arrived. The money was real. We shook hands for the cameras, a long, firm, two-handed grip that broadcast partnership and power. Mr. Hayes, truly honored you could make it, the mayor murmured, his voice tight. The honor is mine, Mayor. This community is ready for this. I used Hayes' deep, measured tone, keeping the cadence slow, letting the words hang in the hot air. The introductions were interminable. The invocation, the ribbon-cutting committee, the local council members thanking Hayes for his vision. I stood there, radiating patience, nodding exactly where the brief told me to nod. Then it was my turn. Darnell slipped a small, laminated card into my palm. Not the full speech, just 5 bullet points of high-impact rhetoric. I walked to the microphone. The camera lights intensified. I took a breath, smelling the freshly turned earth and the faint scent of old garbage, the reality beneath the polish. I grew up hearing about the American dream, I began, projecting my voice just slightly, making sure it carried past the barricades. But for too many of us, the dream wasn't built on foundations of brick and mortar. It was built on layers of debt, on impossible zoning laws, and on promises that never materialized. I paused, scanning the crowd. I met the eyes of a young black woman holding a notebook, probably a local journalist, her expression daring me to be fake. When Sterling Global looks at this lot, I continued, pointing across the dusty field, we don't see an empty space. We see capacity, we see generational potential, and we see an opportunity that, frankly, should have been realized 30 years ago. I launched into the prepared points, adjusting the language slightly. I spoke about ownership, about the necessity of controlling the real estate where innovation happens, not just renting it. I spoke about the specific, brutal reality of trying to scale a black-owned business when every bank and every zoning board defaults to skepticism. I didn't talk about EBITDA or leverage. I talked about legacy. The response was genuine. Clapping, cheers, and a few shouts of, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." It was intoxicating. For 3 minutes, I wasn't an imposter. I was the symbol they needed. The power was real because the money was real, and the money was undeniably black. I finished with the ceremonial shovel, polished chrome, of course, and turned a scoop of dirt. Click, flash, done. The transition off the stage was even quicker than the arrival. Handshakes, whispered congratulations, and then Darnell had me shielded again, moving me back toward the waiting fortress of cars. Next, Darnell stated, once we were sealed inside the Maybach, moving through a police-escorted route toward downtown Tampa, we have the private dinner at the Reserve. Senator Thompson, Mayor Jenkins, and Mr. Preston from Apollo Capital. High-stakes networking, 45 minutes to prep. Preston from Apollo Capital. That name triggered a memory from the briefing binder. Preston Thorne, old school money, fifth-generation Yale, and Sterling Hayes' most persistent, subtle rival. Thorne was known for his cold, surgical hostility. He wouldn't attack the project. He would question the solvency of the man funding it. The stakes just went up. This wasn't public relations anymore. This was the war room, disguised as a meal. The dinner was held in the private dining room of the Reserve, a restaurant that required reservations 6 months in advance for the common folk. For us, it was already waiting, silent, air-conditioned, and lit like a Rembrandt painting. There were only 4 chairs at the massive table. The air smelled of expensive wine and old leather. Senator Thompson was jovial, slightly crude, and very focused on the campaign donation cycle. Mayor Jenkins was still radiating nervous energy. And then there was Preston Thorne. Thorne stood when I entered, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than mine, but it looked quieter, less conspicuous. His watch was smaller, older, radiating ancestral wealth rather than earned triumph. "Sterling," Thorne said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "A spectacular project in Genesis, truly commendable commitment to the community." "Preston," I replied, gripping his hand firmly. I tried to inject all the studied confidence of Sterling Hayes into that single handshake. We build where there is need, not just where the tax breaks are highest. We sat. The waitstaff, moving with ghost-like efficiency, served the first course, some delicate architectural arrangement of scallops. I ate slowly, mimicking the pace Hayes was known for, never rushing, always listening. The conversation revolved around the usual political theater until Thorne steered the knife in. "Sterling, I was reading the prospectus on the St. Kitts properties," Thorne said, casually swirling the Cabernet in his glass. "Aggressive valuation, even for you. Are you anticipating substantial long-term financing from the development bank, or are we looking at a significant cash injection from Sterling Global to smooth out the Q1 2024 liquidity issues?" The question was a direct challenge to the financial structure of the deal I had just pretended to push through 3 hours earlier. Thorne hadn't just read the prospectus. He knew the internal vulnerabilities. My mind raced. Liquidity issues? Hayes was worth billions. Why would he have liquidity issues? Ah, the binder. Hayes wasn't liquid because he kept everything working, leveraged to the hilt. That was the game. Never let cash sit still. I had to respond like Hayes, with total confidence and a subtle deflection that reframed the risk as opportunity. I took a sip of water, giving myself 2 seconds. "Preston, that's an interesting read on the Q1 structure. We view liquidity differently at Sterling Global. I leaned forward, dropping my voice slightly, forcing him to lean in. We're not interested in having vast amounts of cash sitting dormant just to look pretty on a balance sheet. That capital's already deployed, generating 10% returns in the Midwest infrastructure bonds. The St. Kitts acquisition, as you know, is structured through a specialized asset-backed vehicle designed to minimize exposure to short-term market fluctuations. I stared him straight in the eye. The Q1 issue you reference is merely the cost of rapid expansion. We choose velocity over static security, Preston. We always have. And frankly, if you think we're injecting cash, you're missing the point of the leverage structure altogether. I finished the statement with the smallest, most dismissive shrug. Thorne didn't flinch, but the micro-expression of surprise was there, deep behind the eyes. He had expected me to stammer or offer a defensive explanation. I had hit back with technical jargon and an implied critique of his own financial conservatism. Velocity, Thorne repeated, a tight smile returning. Always moving, Sterling. Always moving. The pressure eased slightly. I had passed the test, not because I understood the nuances of the asset-backed vehicle. I didn't. I just remembered the phrase from the briefing. But because I had projected the unwavering belief that I should understand it, and that my decision was inherently correct. The rest of the meal was easier. Thompson started talking about golf. Jenkins was eating quickly, worried about the time. I maintained the posture of the financial sovereign, offering short, decisive comments, but inside, I was vibrating. That interaction had been exhausting. It wasn't enough to be rich. You had to perform the intellectual superiority required to maintain the rich. We finished dinner around 7:30 p.m. No desserts, no lingering. Time was currency. "We are heading to the private residence now, Mr. Hayes," Darnell informed me as we walked out, the security perimeter already in place. "The late-night briefing on the Hong Kong derivatives market is scheduled for 10:00 p.m. A light workout is pre-programmed for 8:30 p.m. A workout. I hadn't exercised seriously since college. Sterling Hayes, of course, maintained a physique optimized for global financial warfare. The private residence wasn't in Tampa proper. It was across the bay in Clearwater, a sprawling modern compound set directly on the beach, hidden behind 10-foot security walls and dense tropical landscaping. The drive was quiet. The Maybach was dark, only the screens casting a soft blue glow. I felt the exhaustion of constant performance settle deep in my bones. 24 hours. We were only halfway through. I looked out the heavily tinted window at the ordinary people driving home, picking up takeout, stopping at gas stations. They had problems: mortgage, child care, health insurance. I had problems that only existed in 9-figure increments. Which life was harder? We pulled up to the gate. It slid open silently, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with palm trees. The air here smelled clean, filtered. The compound was immense, radiating cold, geometric wealth. The house itself was a fortress of glass and concrete, designed by some Pritzker Prize winner to maximize the view and minimize vulnerability. Inside, the lighting was perfect. A single silent attendant met us, taking my jacket and the heavy watch. "Mr. Hayes, the gym is ready for you. Your trainer is waiting via video link in the studio." The studio was dedicated solely to exercise, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, custom equipment, and a massive screen showing a chiseled black man named Coach Marcus, already sweating slightly, waiting for his 1,000 per hour virtual session to begin. I changed into the tailored athletic gear provided, dark gray, compression fit, feeling less like clothes and more like equipment. I looked at myself in the mirror. The writer was totally gone. All that remained was the carefully sculpted image of Sterling Hayes. I started the warm-up, the weight of the day pressing down on me. I lifted the dumbbells, feeling the strain immediately. Coach Marcus's voice, piped through the speakers, was calm, but unrelenting. "Focus, Sterling. Feel the resistance. This isn't about lifting the weight, it's about controlling the descent. Control, Sterling. That's what we do. Control." The word echoed my earlier realization. Midway through the intense 30-minute session, while my lungs were burning and sweat was stinging my eyes, Darnell walked in, standing silently by the doorway. "A private matter, Mr. Hayes," he murmured, holding out the burner phone. "It's your mother," she insisted. My mother, not Hayes's mother. My mother. The only human connection that pierced the billionaire bubble. I wiped my hand on the towel and took the phone. The security protocols must have been temporarily overridden by some deeper, older code of conduct. The unwritten rule that some calls, even for a financial sovereign, cannot be refused. "Hey, Ma," I gasped, winded, trying to sound like the calm, successful son she knew. "Kai, you sound out of breath. Did you run up the stairs again?" Her voice was warm, familiar, Brooklyn thick, a jarring intrusion of reality into the sterile gym. "No, Ma, just finishing a workout. I'm fine." "Are you eating enough? I saw the pictures of that groundbreaking on CNN. You look sharp, baby. Sterling Hayes. Look at God. Just don't forget to call me when you get a minute to breathe, all right?" "I won't, Ma." "And Kai," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "be careful up there." "Always, Ma, always." I hung up, the small, warm connection fading instantly. I handed the phone back to Darnell. He didn't meet my eyes. He was a professional. He heard nothing. I went back to the weights, the conversation serving as a strange, potent fuel. That call was a raw reminder of who I actually was, and the immense, terrifying distance I was currently traversing. The workout ended. My body ached, but my mind was sharper. I took a quick scalding shower in the master bath, which featured 10 different jets and smelled vaguely of sandalwood and success. 8:55 p.m. Time for the Hong Kong briefing. I walked into the home office. It was less a desk and more a cockpit. 6 massive monitors were already glowing, displaying complex graphs, futures markets, and live feeds of Asian stock exchanges. 2 people, a derivatives specialist named Dr. Chen and a market analyst named Anya, were waiting for me via secure video conference, already in their pajamas, operating on Hong Kong time. I sat down. This was the dark side of the money, the truly global, relentless churn that never stopped. "Dr. Chen," "Anya," I said, nodding to the screens. "Let's talk Hang Seng. What are we seeing overnight, and how does this affect the position on the futures?" Dr. Chen started speaking, rattling off numbers, volatility indexes, and hedging strategies that made the hotel deal look like child's play. This wasn't about public perception or political maneuvering. This was pure, high-frequency, algorithmic war. I listened intently. The truth was, I understood about 60% of what they were saying. The other 40% was a blur of calculated risk and insane leverage, but I couldn't show weakness. I let them talk for 20 minutes, absorbing the language, the flow, the tension. Then I interjected, pulling a phrase I'd heard Hayes use in an archived interview. "Stop. Dr. Chen, your analysis hinges on the assumption of a stable regulatory environment post-election. I want a sensitivity analysis run on a 25% increase in capital gains tax imposed by Beijing, effective immediately. What does that do to our position in 3 months, assuming a maximum leverage of 15.1? I watched their faces. They froze. It was a paranoid, highly specific question that suggested I was thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating a catastrophic, low-probability event that they hadn't bothered to model. "Sir," Dr. Chen stammered, adjusting his glasses, "we had not factored in that level of political interference. It would, conservatively, expose us to a 700 basis point drop in value, potentially triggering margin calls on the high-yield derivatives." "Exactly," I said, leaning back, the lie feeling completely real now. "I want a protective hedge strategy implemented immediately. I don't care about the short-term cost. We don't take unnecessary exposure, not on the mainland. Get the numbers to Darnell by midnight. We review the strategy at 6 a.m. sharp." The screens nodded quickly. "Understood, Mr. Hayes?" "Midnight it is." The video call ended. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. I was breathing hard again. I had just moved billions of dollars based on a hunch I'd stolen from a magazine article, leveraging my imposter confidence into a massive financial directive. If Sterling Hayes was wrong, it was a hiccup. If Kai was wrong, it was a global financial disaster. I stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The beach below was dark, the only sound the rhythmic wash of the Gulf. Darnell was waiting by the door. Midnight check-in with the team, 6:00 a.m. briefing. The itinerary is clear until then, Mr. Hayes. And Mr. Hayes? I asked, turning to face him. Does he ever stop? Darnell, the perfectly polished, silent guardian of the empire, allowed himself the tiniest, almost imperceptible shake of the head. He sleeps 4 hours, sir. Never more. The world is always moving. I nodded. The black billionaire life wasn't freedom. It was a highly disciplined 24/7 siege against entropy and expectation. I had 9 hours left in the role, and I was already running on the fumes of someone else's ambition. I needed that 4 hours of sleep. I needed to be ready for the next move, which Darnell had already scheduled for 6:00 a.m., the negotiation phase of the St. Kitts deal, the real bloodletting. I walked toward the master bedroom, the silk sheets, the quiet, the darkness. It was the most luxurious prison cell in the world. I laid down, the feeling of the heavy watch still imprinted on my wrist, waiting for the 6:00 a.m. alarm that would drag me back into the relentless current. The 4 hours of sleep I got felt like 4 minutes of drowning. I woke up exactly at 5:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the alarm, soaked in sweat. Not fear sweat, but the residual metabolic burn from the workout and the anxiety of the Hong Kong derivatives bet I'd made. The room was still dark, silent, perfect. At 6 a.m. sharp, the custom alarm, a low melodic chime that sounded like money, went off. I was back in the command center by 6:15 a.m. New suit, custom blend coffee, 185 degrees. Dr. Chen and Anya were waiting on the screens again, looking like death warmed over. But they had the hedge strategy ready. We implemented the protective position, Mr. Hayes, Dr. Chen reported, his voice shaky. It cost us $15 million in immediate short-term yield, but the exposure is minimized. Good, I said, leaning over the dark mahogany table. Minimize exposure, maximize control. Now let's move to St. Kitts. The video line opened. On the screen were 3 men in tailored linen, sitting in what looked like a colonial office, probably sweating through their expensive shirts in some humid Caribbean boardroom. They were the sellers, representing the family trust that owned the boutique hotels. The lead negotiator, a pale, aggressive man named Julian, started immediately, his voice echoing slightly over the fiber optics. Mr. Hayes, we received your revised term sheet. Frankly, the 5-year non-compete on the regional charter business is untenable. It undervalues the assets and limits our future liquidity. He was pushing back exactly as Vanessa predicted. Julian thought he was negotiating with a cautious buyer. I didn't let him finish. Julian, stop, I cut in, my voice sharp, carrying the weight of the last 20 hours of channeled authority. Let's be clear, your assets are beautiful, yes, but they are located in a volatile regulatory environment, and frankly, post-hurricane season, they are a liability without deep capital protection. I locked eyes with him through the screen. I am not here to maximize your liquidity. I am here to maximize my long-term value. We need the 5-year protection. If you want the premium we are offering, you take the 5-year term. If you don't, I will use that capital to finance the construction of 3 new competing properties on Nevis and Puerto Rico, and I will have them operational before your renovations are complete. I paused. The classic Hayes ultimatum, not a threat, but a statement of absolute leverage. Julian stammered, shuffling papers. Mr. Hayes, that's an aggressive posture. We need time to confer with the trust. You have until 9 p.m. Eastern, I stated, glancing at the Patek on my wrist, 8:15 a.m. At 9:01 a.m., the offer drops by 25%, and the non-compete reverts to 3 years. Your risk, Julian, not mine. I stood up, abruptly ending the video feed. The screen went black. Darnell, I said, walking toward the window, feeling the surge of genuine, pure adrenaline. I had just risked hundreds of millions on a bluff. Tell Vanessa to prepare the final closing documents for the full price, 5-year term. They'll fold within the hour. Darnell, who had been standing silent in the doorway, simply nodded. He knew the psychology of the play, and they did fold. At 8:52 a.m., Julian's assistant called the secured line. They accepted the terms. Full price, 5-year non-compete. Sterling Global had acquired its Caribbean portfolio. The feeling was electric, a rush of power so absolute it made me dizzy. I had won. I, Kai, the writer, had closed a $300 million deal. 9 a.m. The clock was ticking down. I stayed in the office, signing the digital closing documents, a formality handled by security-verified biometric scans. 9:30 a.m. Darnell came back in. He didn't look triumphant, just detached. "It's time, Mr. Hayes," he said. The shift was instant, chilling. The shared mission was over. The host needed his suit back. I walked back into the master suite. The charcoal suit, the crisp shirt, the expensive shoes, they all came off. I removed the Patek Philippe, the $250,000 anchor, and placed it gently on the valet tray. The weight was immediately gone, leaving a faint cold ring on my skin. I changed back into the clothes I had arrived in, the jeans, the comfortable, slightly worn leather jacket, the simple watch. They felt thin, cheap, and foreign after the armor. "The transport is waiting," Darnell said, holding a small, unmarked envelope. "Where are we going?" "Tampa International, Mr. Hayes. Commercial terminal." The drive back across the bay was silent, heavy. The Maybach was the same, but the energy had drained out of the sealed, armored box. Darnell wasn't guarding me anymore. He was just moving a package. We didn't take the police escort. We sat in traffic, just like the Hondas. I saw people arguing, texting, swearing. The noise was back, the inconvenience, the friction. We pulled up to the curb at Departure's Delta Terminal. Darnell didn't get out. "Your ticket is on the burner phone, sir. First class, direct to Atlanta. Mr. Sterling requested this envelope be handed to you upon departure." I took the envelope. It was heavy cardstock. "Darnell," I said, looking at the man who had been my shadow, my protector, my financial encyclopedia for the last day. "Thank you. What did you think of the Hong Kong analysis?" Darnell looked straight ahead, his eyes flat, reflecting the airport lights. "It was necessary, sir. Safe travels." That was it. No handshake, no reflection, no human acknowledgement of the performance. I was off the clock. I got out of the Maybach. The heavy door thumped shut behind me, sealing the quiet in. Darnell's car pulled immediately away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the traffic, leaving me alone in the humid Florida air, surrounded by the grinding chaos of luggage carts and shouting airport employees. I was back. Kai. I walked toward the automatic doors. I looked down at the envelope. I ripped it open. Inside was a single card, thick and creamy, embossed with the Sterling Global Hawk, and a check. The check was payable to Kai for the sum of $25,000. Under the signature line, a single handwritten note from Sterling Hayes: "Pay the tax, keep the velocity." I shoved the check into my jacket pocket. I smelled the Cinnabon stand, the stale jet fuel, the cheap perfume. I felt the overwhelming, crushing realization that I now had to argue with a machine about checking my bag size. I walked up to the self-check kiosk, touching the cold, sticky screen. The screen flashed. "Please insert your credit card to pay the $45 checked baggage fee." I pulled out my worn wallet, the leather peeling slightly. My Visa card, the one with the $1,500 limit. I hesitated. I had $25,000 in my pocket, enough to solve every immediate financial problem I had, enough to buy a first-class upgrade right now, maybe bypass the whole ordeal. But I was no longer Sterling Hayes. I swiped the Visa. The transaction went through with the painful, familiar beep. Then I stood there, waiting for the luggage tag to print, breathing in the polluted, busy air of the real world, already feeling the heavy, cold ghost of a $250,000 watch on my bare wrist. Go back to work. Write the story. Now.